Throughout history, there's been this tension between large, centralized control and local grassroots initiatives. So, for example, in the late 1950s, as tons and tons of Americans were moving out of cities and into suburbs, they created many, many municipal governments. And there was a concern that this proliferation of small governments would create an inefficiency. So there was a proposal on the table that we should create large metropolitan regional governments. And the term used was actually gargantua to describe this idea of large, powerful metropolitan governments. And gargantua, that term refers back to Gargantua, the all-powerful giant, from Rabelais' satirical and also scatological novels. So then, in the early 1960s, Vincent Ostrom, who was actually the husband of Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize, proposed this idea of polycentric systems of governance. And polycentric literally means multiple centers. So in polycentric governance systems, there's multiple players acting at multiple levels. At the local level, we might have neighborhood block associations, businesses like corner grocery stores, parent-teacher associations, and community gardens. And then at the larger scale, we also have multiple players. So you can think of at the city level, we have city government, but we also have maybe an alliance of community gardens and an association of businesses, and so on through the county, state, country, and international level. So I want to illustrate this idea of polycentric governance systems for you using the example of the Chicago Wilderness. The Chicago Wilderness is a regional alliance dedicated to protecting nature and enriching life. And you can see that it's not just in Chicago. The Chicago Wilderness is actually operates in a large metropolitan region with Chicago at the center. So the Chicago Wilderness consists of a network of green spaces, and they include things like county forest preserves, city parks, botanic gardens and zoos, rivers and lakefront, and community gardens. And at the state level, you have the Illinois chapter of the Nature Conservancy, as well as planning and state agencies. And then finally, at the national level, you have corporations like Davey Tree Corporation, which supports the Chicago Wilderness, as well as federal agencies like the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service, and the Land Trust Alliance, a nonprofit that's national. But interestingly, the Chicago Wilderness Alliance is also part of a national Metropolitan Green Spaces Alliance group. And so we have alliances of alliances. And the Metropolitan Green Spaces Alliances includes actually other regional alliances, so not only Chicago Wilderness, but also regional alliances in Portland, Oregon, and Houston, Texas, among other cities. So with polycentric governance, what you have is both horizontal layers and vertical layers of institutions and green spaces. And together, these spaces and governance institutions create what is the Chicago Wilderness. And I know, because I've done a little bit of work with the Chicago Wilderness, that the whole is actually more than the sum of the individual parts. So why is polycentric governance important? Well, we know that environmental and social and economic problems are complex, and that government alone doesn't really have the ability to solve these problems. So what polycentric governance systems do is they bring multiple options or ideas to the table. And this diversity of options and ideas enables innovation. And we can think of each green space or each little environmental stewardship organization or church that's involved in conservation care as an experiment. And we have therefore multiple experiments across the landscape. And we can learn by trial and error from these experiments and weed out those that are most successful. And finally, we have cooperation amongst all these different governance institutions. And that, in the best of situations, can create trust, which is important for collective action. So Elinor Ostrom, I think, captured all these reasons why polycentric governance is important. She said, no governance system is perfect, but polycentric systems have considerable advantages given their mechanisms for learning and adaptation of better strategies over time. And so let's think back to what I talked about in the beginning, this idea of centralized large gargantua governments for metropolitan regions. and think of those gargantua governments as single governance units. And Elinor Ostrom went on to say, an important lesson is that simply recommending a single governance unit to solve our problems needs to be seriously rethought.